Well, for more on China-Africa ties, we're joined now by Abdullahi Halakhe, the security and policy analyst with Horn of Africa. Welcome to our broadcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Susan.
Does this eastern section of Africa remain the largest recipient of China's investment?
Not necessarily. I mean, they're up there. I mean, you have, Egypt, you have Nigeria, you have Algeria, you have Mozambique and South Africa in that order. But for obvious reasons, that is because of the railway system. That the Eastern Africa, that is the Horn of Africa, that includes Ethiopia, remains one of the critical part in the Silk Road Initiative.
The Belt and Road Initiative has two African hubs, obviously Kenya and Egypt, but Chinese-funded rail and communication networks are also linking other East African countries we were just talking about, like Ethiopia, Tanzania, Rwanda. Which other countries around here stand to benefit the most?
I think for most part, I mean, one of the things that is not said is that some of these investments are incredibly strategic, and it cut both ways. I mean, there are around 1.2 million Africans, and these areas that are largely unconnected. Some of these trans-country railway line infrastructure, whether it's hydro electricity, whether it's dams, as well as large roads that link some of these countries, are incredibly critical at this time in Africa, where there has been an explosion of population that the movement of not just goods and services, but also people from one country to another. And China comes in at that point. It also needs to be mentioned that these are infrastructure projects that have been in the pipeline for quite some time, but because of the stringent nature of getting funding from other parts of the world, particularly in the West, China's, non-interference comes in very handy in terms of giving the money, the engineering and transfer of technology that is required to take these countries to the next level in terms of their economic expansion.
With the leadership changes in Liberia and Zimbabwe, do you anticipate any change in the impact this is going to have on investment?
Not necessarily, because I mean some of these investments are fairly guided by a very robust, contractual agreement between the countries rather than the leadership. So in many cases, whether it's a change in leadership in Angola, whether there's a change of leadership in Liberia that we are anticipating because George Weah has been declared the president, as well as the change of leadership in Zimbabwe, I'll be hard pressed to think that there will be a change in direction for the Sino-Africa relations.
In terms of Chinese imports, are any of the local companies undercut by this, or is that offset always by the Belt and Road Initiative impact?
I think some of those discussions have been taking place. What you hear a lot of the time is in mainstream Western media, what you get is there is, if you will, a disproportionate focus on, this is not giving African companies a lot of time or opportunity to be able to do some of these things. But the level of economic development, it really offsets some of these areas where there seems to be some friction. Although I might add that some of it is a disproportionate focus. But it must be said that these are some of the teething challenges that can be improved. Over time, China has been able to be very adept in terms of how it deals with some of these issues, and you'd hope in the future, because we are really at the beginning of these discussions and engagement between China and Africa, some of these things will be sorted out.
Where does the West stand now in terms of investment, now that China is really taking the lead?
I think for the West, I think one of the things that they really need to figure out, I'll just give an example of the United States, just a basic example. China has got over 50 ambassadors in 54 African countries. For the United States, for instance, 13 of African diplomatic positions have not been filled. That just gives you a sense of where Africa is looked at, where the priority for the Chinese is economic development, non-interference in domestic political affairs. And for the West, for a very long time, the aid, the support, the economic investment was contingent on some of these, very sensitive nature of the relations. So because of that, the West really needs to find a very innovative way, of dealing with Africa that is getting more empowered, more African middle class, more Africans are joining middle class. There are increasing number of wealthy people. The traditional way of, just summoning some of these African leaders, of speaking to them in a fairly patronizing tone,
Yes.
will really needs to give way to a more robust mutual engagement, and that is they have to learn from China, that has been able to, as of now, been able to hack that.
Abdullahi Halakhe, thank you for your time.